Welcome to the deep dive. Forget the battles for a moment. We're going into the weeds of history today, looking at something that shaped the English army from the inside out. Its disciplinary ordinances. Think of these as the rule books for soldiers in the field between 1385 and, well, 1585.
Exactly. And we've got a fascinating collection of sources to explore this. There are detailed analyses from a University of Southampton thesis comparing these ordinances across time. Really useful stuff.
Okay.
We'll also be looking at insights from, places like Reddit discussions on medieval armies and articles from De Re Military and History Today, just to get the bigger picture.
Right. Our mission in this deep dive is to go beyond just, listing rules. We want to understand how these evolving regulations reflect changes in warfare, army organization, and the daily lives of soldiers in medieval and early modern England.
Yeah, get a feel for it.
Consider this your fast track to understanding a really pivotal period. Okay, so let's unpack the earliest set of these rules, dating back to 1385 under Richard II.
Okay. The backdrop for 1385 is crucial. They were created for a campaign in Scotland. It was a response to Scottish raids, which were backed by the French.
Ah, the old alliance causing trouble again.
Pretty much. And what's particularly interesting is that England didn't have a standing army like we think of today. It was largely a feudal levy.
So nobles bringing their own guys.
Exactly. Nobles and their personal followers obligated to serve the king. And this kind of army, made up of all these individual retinues, well, it presented some serious challenges for command and control.
I bet. Which these ordinances clearly aim to tackle right from the start then. The very first clause, for instance, is all about establishing the king's authority.
Precisely. Clause 1 of the 1385 ordinances just lays down the law. Everyone in the king's host, doesn't matter where they came from or the status, had to obey the king.
Right.
And not just the king, but also, except for his top commanders, they had to obey the marshal of the host. And the penalty, death.
Wow, straight in there.
Yeah, it immediately sets up a clear chain of command and really underlines who's in charge. And, why was this so vital? Because with a feudal levy, you've got these powerful nobles used to doing their own thing. Asserting the king's direct authority was, well, fundamental to stop the whole campaign just falling apart into separate actions.
Makes sense. And following that, there's a real emphasis on protecting the church. Clauses 2 and 3, they spell out some pretty harsh punishments for anyone harming the sacrament, church property, or clergy. I mean, drawing, hanging, beheading, just for touching the vessel of the sacrament.
Yeah, it sounds extreme to us, but this focus on the sanctity of the church wasn't unusual then. Religion was everywhere in medieval society. Armies often had lots of clergy with them.
Okay.
So protecting the church and its people was probably seen as essential, not just for morale in the ranks, but also for, ensuring God was on their side for the campaign.
Right, divine favor.
Imagine the chaos if religious figures or holy items were harmed. It could seriously undermine the whole thing.
Then we get into the really practical stuff, army movement. Clauses 4 and 26 deal with keeping marching order, stopping guys wandering off. It mentions harbingers, people sent ahead to sort out lodgings, and strict rules against anyone breaking ranks to grab the best spots. It sounds like trying to avoid a mad scramble for rooms.
That's a great way to put it. With an army made of these sort of separate retinues, keeping everyone together and stopping individuals from just wandering off was crucial. Security, logistics, everything.
In these harbingers.
Yeah, they played a vital role. Ensuring the army moved in an organized way, found suitable places to stay. The fact that clauses 4 and 26 seem to cover similar ground, as the Southampton thesis points out, might suggest, these were maybe later additions.
Tacked on to older rules.
Possibly.
Right.
Maybe rules dating back to Edward III's campaigns like Creasy. It wasn't necessarily a clean, brand new document written all at once.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me. The rules around prisoners and ransom. Clauses 12, 19, 22, 48, 51, they paint a picture where capturing an enemy could be, well, seriously profitable.
Oh, absolutely.
Rules on who gets credit, taking faith and bassinet gauntlet as a pledge like a medieval IOU, right? A bassinet and gauntlet being helmet and glove armor.
Exactly. And it shows that balancing act between individual profit and the commander's authority.
Yeah.
The financial side of war back then, you just can't overestimate it. Ransoming captured knights, nobles, huge source of income for soldiers, for their captains.
But the rules tried to manage it.
They did. These clauses show a clear attempt to regulate it. The king and the command structure wanted their cut too, usually a third, Clause 51 says.
Right.
And needing that pledge, the bassinet or gauntlet, it was like physical proof. Help stop arguments over who actually
Right.
caught the guy.
And Clause 22, where someone else could claim the prisoner if the first guy didn't get a pledge.
Yeah, that really highlights the tension, doesn't it? Individual initiative versus following the proper procedure. It's a reminder that, yeah, personal gain was a big motivator, but it had to happen within the rules. Ransom was also this significant, maybe localized economic thing, redistributing wealth after a fight.
Obedience to captains comes up again and again, clauses 6 and 43 especially. It seems clear they needed to clamp down on individual desires for the good of the whole army.
Definitely.
We see it in lodging rules again, 5 and 25, stopping people moving about without permission, and also clauses 10 and 34, banning arguments and fights. Sounds like preventing internal squabbles was vital.
Absolutely. An army made of different lords and their followers could easily just fall apart because of rivalries. These ordinances aimed for unity, a common purpose. The safety of the whole army came before individual complaints or ambitions.
That Holland-Stafford incident the thesis mentions, in relation to Clause 9 about company shouts.
Yeah, that really shows the challenge, doesn't it? Trying to unify the host beyond just loyalty to your own captain. Even their specific battle cries meant for recognition could become flashpoints in disputes.
Foraging for supplies is covered in Clauses 8 and 33, and keeping watch in 6 and 44. It's interesting how these seem to get more detailed later on.
Well, the basic need to feed the army and stay alert, that never changes. But how they regulated it probably adapted. The thesis suggests maybe the first clauses were quite broad, general reminders, and later rules got more specific, more stringent for these essential jobs.
And using symbols for ID, like St. George's Cross in Clause 16, seems pretty sensible for telling friend from foe in a chaotic fight.
Exactly. Heat of battle, clear visual signs were crucial. Prevent friendly fire, make sure you could find your mates. St. George's Cross became, a really lasting symbol for the English army.
The thesis makes that really interesting point about the slightly disorganized feel of these early clauses, suggesting they might be a collection of old rules with new ones added on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It would explain why similar topics aren't always neatly grouped together.
That idea of gradual development, building on what came before, maybe from Edward III's time, it fits the structure of these early ordinances. Probably wasn't a completely new, systematically planned set of rules dropped all at once.
And finally, it's noted they don't include detailed battle plans. Flexibility seems to have been the priority over rigid formations.
Yeah, that fits with what we generally know about medieval warfare. Often more fluid, less standardized tactics compared to later. Commanders likely preferred to adapt based on the ground, their forces, the enemy,
Okay, so that gives us a solid picture of 1385. Let's jump forward now to Henry V. Specifically, his ordinances from 1419 and 1421 during the conquest of Normandy. Very different context, right? Going from a short Scottish campaign to a long-term occupation in France.
That change in context is absolutely key. Henry V wasn't just raiding, he was aiming for full-on conquest, establishing English rule in Normandy. That meant soldiers serving for much longer and a different set of priorities showing up in the rules.
And one immediate difference is who gets the credit for the rules. Unlike 1385, which mentioned the King's Council being involved, these Mantes ordinances are solely attributed to King Henry V himself. Feels like a stronger assertion of royal power.
That's a very sharp observation. It can definitely reflect Henry V's desire to project this image of strong central leadership, especially during something as massive as conquering Normandy. It stands out compared to Richard II's situation earlier.
We also see clauses being removed or significantly changed. Clause 25 on lodging from 1385 is replaced by Clause 32, which seems to address a new threat to peaceful lodging, other English soldiers.
Yes.
And that 1385 Clause 22 about a prisoner's fate, that's just gone.
The lodging clause change really speaks to the new dynamics, doesn't it? In a long occupation, the potential for fights over quarters among your own troops became a bigger worry than maybe the hit-and-run stuff Richard II's clause was aimed at. And removing the clause about prisoners' fate, maybe they found it impossible to enforce, or perhaps it caused problems they didn't anticipate. Sometimes rules just get tweaked based on what actually works or doesn't on the ground.
Foraging rules get much stricter under Henry V. More comprehensive, replacing that broader Clause 8 from 1385. Makes perfect sense. Needing to feed a big army in occupied land for ages.
Absolutely. A conquering army couldn't just carry everything forever. Clear, strict rules for foraging were essential. Feed the army without, completely alienating the locals, which was part of Henry's policy of conciliation towards the Normans, trying to win them over, at least pacify them.
And there are totally new clauses reflecting this conquest goal. Clause 13 for musters, trying to stop fraudulent musters. I guess that was a big worry with longer service. Captains inflating numbers to skim pay.
Oh, yeah. Preventing fraudulent musters, claiming pay and supplies for soldiers who weren't actually there was a constant headache in armies back then. Clause 13 is a direct attempt to stop it, make sure only real serving soldiers were counted at musters.
Musters being the formal head counts.
Exactly. Checking numbers, readiness.
There's also a big emphasis on punishing soldiers who leave their stables during foraging. Clause 24. That sounds much more organized, soldiers working in protected groups. Stales being these foraging parties with guards, right?
Exactly. The stale system was a more structured, safer way to forage. Soldiers went out in these groups with armed guards to protect them while they gathered supplies. Ditching your duty in the stale for personal gain was serious because it could put the whole party at risk.
Regulations for assembling during alarms, Clause 31, really stressed tactical formation. Again, points to a more organized, maybe bigger army where getting into battle order quickly was vital.
Yeah, in conquered territory, the threat of sudden attacks, local uprisings, it was always there. Clause 31 aimed to ensure that if an alarm sounded sudden danger, troops would quickly get into their proper battle formations, ready to face whatever it was, organized.
Banning unauthorized truces or releasing prisoners without permission, Clauses 35 and 52, that reinforces the central control again. Stops individual commanders cutting deals that mess up the king's overall plan.
Critical for unity of command, prevented captains acting independently on diplomacy or prisoners, stuff that could have big political or strategic fallout for the whole campaign.
Clauses 26 and 58 called for keeping of the country, focus on protecting Normans who submitted to the king marked by St. George's Cross. Clause 57 says, and banning pillaging after peace is declared. Really shows that shift towards long-term occupation, needing order, and some local goodwill.
Henry Sift knew that to secure his conquest, he needed some level of order, protect Normans who submitted. The St. George's Cross was that clear visual marker of allegiance. And banning pillaging after peace, key part of making the environment less hostile, encouraging cooperation.
Those clauses on interacting with Normans, 28, 29, 59, are fascinating, including that slightly unsettling rule about taking child prisoners, but with exceptions for kids of nobles and captains. The thesis suggests this might have been a way to look chivalrous by generally banning it, while still allowing them to grab valuable hostages from the elite.
It's complex, isn't it? Multiple possible reasons. Banning child capture generally could look chivalrous, lessen civilian suffering, but the exceptions for high-status kids suggests a more calculated, strategic reason.
Hostages.
Valuable hostages, yeah. Leverage in negotiations, maybe help ensure their families stayed obedient. The thesis also notes that people knew about these policies at the time, suggesting it was a deliberate effort to shape Henry's image, both at home and in France.
The distribution of the ordinances is specifically mentioned too, Clause 40. Captains had to tell their men the rules. That feels like a step up in transparency and accountability from 1385.
Definitely. Making captains directly responsible for making sure their men knew the rules. Big step towards stronger discipline, harder to plead ignorance, clearer line of responsibility, better enforcement.
Interestingly, the Maquis ordinances don't have specific sanitation clauses. Seems odd for a long campaign, high risk of disease. The thesis suggests maybe because they were often in areas with existing towns and cities.
That's plausible. Unlike a campaign marching through rural areas, an army occupying established towns might have used existing facilities. Though, as the thesis mentions later, for other periods, sanitation often became a major issue during long sieges or when camped out for ages away from towns.
And finally, regulations about soldiers' wives. Clause 30 shows they were there, had a role, even with rules against common women. Gives a glimpse into the personal side of army life.
Yeah, the presence of wives, even with restrictions, acknowledges they were part of the army's wider community, probably doing essential stuff, cooking, laundry, nursing. The distinction between wives and common women likely reflects an attempt to keep order, prevent disruptions to discipline and morale.
Okay, moving on. The thesis looks at some interim ordinances between Henry V and Henry VIII, specifically for garrisons at Rouen, Salisbury, and Calais. Not quite the same as royal rules for field armies, but they give insights into how discipline adapted locally.
These garrison rules are great snapshots of the specific worries in fixed locations. Rouen, 1421, for example, big focus on keeping order in the occupied city, defining the captain's authority in the garrison, obedience to the lieutenant of Normandy, other royal officials, reflecting ongoing English control.
And
Crucially, dealing with arguments over booty.
booty again seems like a constant source of friction. Rouen rules mention disagreements by reason of booty or gain arising out of the act of war.
It was a major flashpoint. Plunder was a huge motivator for soldiers. The Rouen Ordinances tried to set up a clear, formal way to settle these disputes within the garrison, stop them turning violent or wrecking discipline in the city.
Salisbury's Ordinances, 1460s temporary rules for a specific expedition. They stressed cohesive movement into enemy land, sharing battle gear, collective booty acquisition, while also reaffirming Henry V's policies. Sounds tailored for a shorter specific mission.
The focus on coordinated movement, pooling resources in Salisbury's rules suggests they wanted maximum effectiveness from what was probably a smaller force operating in enemy territory. And explicitly reaffirming Henry V's policies shows how effective his approach was seen even decades later.
Then Calais, 1465 and 1475, long-held English spot on the continent. These rules address very specific long-term garrison issues, right?
Exactly. Things like the soldiers' finances, keeping the actual fortress maintained, even rules against dumping rubbish, and detailed organization for foraging, bringing up those stales again.
Right, the protected foraging parties.
The Kelly rules really show the unique challenges of maintaining a permanent military base. Financial stability for the troops, constant upkeep of the walls, careful foraging, balancing security and supplies, all critical. The thesis notes clauses about providing clothing livery and the direct payment of the garrison by wool staplers under Edward IV gives a glimpse into the complex logistics and finance needed for that outpost.
Now we jump ahead to Henry VII. Ordinances from 1487 and 1492. The 1487 set enforcing public order, issued right after Bosworth. Main goal: quick military stand-down, stop the new army hassling people in friendly territory. Echoes Henry V and Normandy, really.
Yeah, after a big, decisive battle like Bosworth, Henry VII's priority was demobilizing quickly and smoothly. The 1487 rules aimed to prevent the looting and disorder that could easily happen when a big army is disbanding at home. Clear parallels to Henry V's concerns about order during and after his campaigns.
The 1492 ordinances prepared well ahead for a planned French campaign, though it ended up being short. What's really significant here is they were prepared beforehand and available in printed English versions. Big step towards standardization, centralization, compared to the old handwritten Anglo-Norman ones.
Absolutely. Printed in English, given to captains before they even set off, shows growing sophistication in military admin. A clear move towards making sure the rules were widely understood, consistently enforced across the whole army. Big change from the limited spread of earlier manuscript versions.
Moving into Henry VIII's reign, his 1513 ordinances for invading France, including the siege of Therouanne, we see even more steps towards central control, something looking more like a modern military structure taking shape.
The 1513 ordinances under Henry VIII definitely continue that trend. More royal authority, more formalized, standardized military. The context of a major French invasion gave a strong push for even stricter, more detailed rules.
Clause 1 now has a direct oath of obedience sworn to the king himself. Plus, new emphasis on the quality of recruits, enforced by commissioners at musters. Seems more proactive about getting capable soldiers.
The direct oath to the king really underscores that shift away from old feudal ties towards a more direct loyalty between soldier and monarch. And using royal commissioners at musters to check recruit quality shows growing concern for overall military effectiveness, moving away from just letting captains choose their own guys.
Rules banning self-promotion in the ranks, Clause 23. Detailing captain accountability for their retinues, Clause 19. Including reporting personnel changes and stopping wage theft, all points to a more bureaucratic, centrally watched system.
These clauses were designed to stop internal instability from unauthorized promotions and tackle that old problem of captains profiting from ghost soldiers, requiring captains to formally report changes in their units within 10 days. Significant step towards more financial accountability, admin oversight.
The explicit rule that captains must pay their soldiers promptly and fully, Clause 11, seems basic, but the fact it's spelled out suggests maybe it wasn't always happening.
Ensuring soldiers got paid regularly and correctly was absolutely crucial for morale, prevented unrest, even mutiny. The strong penalties for captains who failed show how important the crown thought the soldiers' financial well-being was.
Bans on unauthorized soldier meetings, Clause 14, adopting new weapons without permission, Clause 26. Limits on gambling, Clause 29, all seem aimed at keeping order, preventing fights and disruptions.
Yeah, a continued, intensified effort to tightly control soldier behavior, prevent anything leading to disorder, conflict, or undermining effectiveness. Banning new weapons without permission, maybe to standardize gear, or maybe to stop challenges to social hierarchies reflected in traditional arms.
We also see a clearer chain of responsibility for enforcing discipline, clauses 24-47, detailed rules for responding to alarms, 25-43, controlling food supplies and markets near the army, 28-31. Definitely a much more structured, controlled environment for the average soldier.
The increasing detail and specifics show a more sophisticated grasp of the complex logistics and discipline needed for a large army on campaign. The Crown was clearly trying to exert more direct control over pretty much all aspects of military operations.
The rules on prisoners and ransom profits get even more elaborate, clearly outlining roles for the treasurer and marshal, clauses 46, 49, 50, 51, 106, 108, 109, in making sure the king's share of ransoms and captured goods was properly collected.
The increasingly detailed rules around capture, custody, ransom underscores the ongoing economic importance and the Crown's determination to get its slice. Involving high-ranking officers like the treasurer and marshal shows that ongoing trend towards centralization, royal control over everything military.
And finally, the growing importance of specialized officers like the Master of Ordnance, clauses 40, 121, 122, directly reflects gunpowder weapons and artillery becoming more significant.
The emergence of the Master of Ordnance as a key figure with his own specialized company. Clear sign of the military revolution happening. More reliance on artillery, gunpowder weapons needed dedicated experts for procurement, maintenance, deployment, led to these specialized roles popping up.
Okay, our final set of ordinances. Elizabeth I, 1585, issued by Leicester for English forces in the Netherlands during the 80 Years' War. By now, England's a much more centralized state, recruitment handled more through county lieutenants.
The 1585 ordinances are a really significant step towards what we'd recognize as modern military discipline. The specific context, English involvement in the Netherlands helping fellow Protestants against the Habsburgs, also likely shaped the rules they thought were needed. And yeah, recruitment via county lieutenants reflects a more central standard system than the old feudal levies and private contracts.
The thesis sees clear evidence of a growing focus on discipline based on automatic obedience to superiors. Comparing these with earlier ones, you see continuities like keeping a reworded forbearers clause about quarrel starters, but also big changes reflecting how war and the state were evolving.
Right. While some basic concerns about order lasted, the stronger emphasis on unquestioning obedience to all superior officers, not just your own captain, like Clause 41 stresses, really signals a move towards a more hierarchical, less personally dependent command system, crucial for managing bigger, more complex forces.
There's a noticeable focus on stopping soldiers selling or losing equipment, clauses 21-22. The thesis suggests this reflects the Crown increasingly providing the arms directly.
Makes sense.
Efforts to centralize supply chains are also clear, clauses 27-25 on forestalling, stopping people buying up goods before market.
With the Crown taking more responsibility for equipping the army, stopping soldiers from losing or selling that valuable kit became a big priority. And centralizing supply chains. That was about making sure the army got what it needed and stopping individuals profiting by jacking up prices.
Even stricter rules against messing with muster numbers, clauses 15, 20, 66, 67. That persistent problem of fake musters seems to have been a challenge authorities kept wrestling with for centuries.
Indeed. The continued and increasingly tough efforts to stop captains in fleeting muster rolls just underlines the huge financial pressures of keeping an army and the constant need for accountability, stopping financial scams in the military admin.
Several new clauses pop up reflecting the specific Dutch campaign context, like rules forbidding giving away the secret watchword, clause 13, demanding silence on the march, clause 48, banning unauthorized chats with the enemy, clause 35, and strict rules on soldiers entering camps or towns, clause 54, all clearly dealing with fighting in a foreign land alongside allies near the enemy.
These new rules were definitely tailored for the unique challenges in the Netherlands. Operating with allies in a war zone where secrecy, stopping unauthorized enemy contact, and controlling troop movements in friendly areas were all vital for security and success.
There are also clear attempts to enforce a positive public image, high discipline, clauses 2, 3, 4. Likely reflects the religious and political side of that war, supporting the Protestant cause.
Yeah, given the English were backing Protestant rebels against Catholic Spain, keeping a disciplined, morally upright image both for the locals in the Netherlands and the public back home would have been strategically important. for getting and keeping support for the war.
Interestingly, the emphasis on taking prisoners for ransom seems to drop off quite a bit compared to earlier rules, Clause 40. The thesis suggests maybe fewer opportunities, or maybe the economics of ransom just changed by then.
The changing nature of late 16th century warfare, maybe less individual combat, more big formations, more firepower, might have reduced chances for grabbing high-value prisoners the old way. Plus, the whole financial landscape of war might have shifted the incentives around ransoming enemies.
We also see a specific rule dealing with volunteer private captains, Clause 39, maybe trying to better integrate these guys and their independent companies into the main army structure.
Could be.
And finally, the thesis notes the somewhat surprising lack of clauses protecting religious buildings and people. Potential reasons range from printing errors to the specific religious context of the Dutch War itself.
Regulating volunteer captains suggests an ongoing effort to standardize command, even with privately raised units. The missing clauses on protecting religious buildings. It is intriguing, as the thesis suggests, could be various factors, including the complex, often volatile religious dynamics in the Netherlands conflict, where maybe the lines between friendly and enemy religious sites were less clear than before.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into this fascinating world of English Army disciplinary ordinances 1385 to 1585, what are the key takeaways for our listener?
Well, I think the evolution of these ordinances gives us a really remarkable, detailed window into how English armies changed over 2 centuries. We see this clear, significant shift from forces based largely on feudal ties and personal retinues, where individual initiative, personal profit from ransom were big deals, towards more centralized, state-controlled armies. Much more emphasis on strict obedience, standard discipline, and the complex logistics of longer campaigns, even overseas deployments.
Right.
And these rules, they don't just show changes in military tactics or organization, they give real insights into broader social dynamics, shifting economic realities, and the steadily growing authority of the English monarchy during this really pivotal time in history.
Yeah, absolutely. And considering these incredibly detailed evolving regulations, it really makes you stop and think, what was daily life actually like for a common soldier on campaign during these different times? How effective were these often very specific rules in practice? And what kinds of loopholes or, challenges might ordinary soldiers and their captains have constantly faced trying to navigate or maybe sometimes get around these regulations? It really pushes you to consider the human element behind these documents. Look beyond the big battles and famous leaders. Try and grasp the lived experience of the men who actually made up these armies. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.